Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. The officer's voice was firm but careful as he stood between the woman and the teenage boy. The woman, red-faced and clutching her phone like a weapon, was pointing at the boy. "He doesn't belong here," she shrieked. "I've never seen him before, and he's lurking around my car." The boy, no older than 16, stood silently, his eyes downcast. His hoodie was pulled tight over his head, and he clutched a basketball under his arm. He hadn't said much since the officer arrived. "Ma'am," the officer repeated, "he told me he's waiting for someone." "I don't believe him," she snapped. "He's up to something. People like him always are." The officer sighed, turning back to the boy. "Son, what's your name? Who are you waiting for?" The boy finally looked up, his voice steady but soft. "Malik, I'm waiting for my mom." The woman scoffed loudly. "Oh, please. I bet his mom doesn't even know he's out here. Probably some excuse to avoid getting arrested." The officer's radio crackled. Before he could respond, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The door swung open, and a woman stepped out, dressed in a sharp navy suit. Her heels clicked purposefully against the pavement as she approached. "That's my mom," Malik said quietly. The officer straightened up immediately. The woman who had been shouting fell silent, her mouth hanging open. She recognized the face from the news. Everyone in town did. It was Mayor Deanna Carter. Without missing a beat, Mayor Carter walked up to her son, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. Then she turned to the officer. "Officer, has there been a problem with my son?" Before the officer could respond, the other woman stammered, "Your son? You're his?" "Yes," Mayor Carter said, her voice calm but commanding. "I'm his mother. And you are?" The woman's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked between the mayor, the officer, and Malik, then back to the mayor. Mayor Carter raised an eyebrow, waiting for an answer. The tension was thick, and the silence seemed to stretch forever. Finally, the woman blurted, "I didn't know." The mayor tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Didn't know what?" The woman hesitated, her hands shaking. "That he belongs here," she mumbled. Mayor Carter's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge to it, one that hinted this wasn't over. She turned to the officer, her tone crisp. "Officer, I'd like to know exactly why my son is being detained." Before the officer could explain, the woman gasped, clutching her chest as if realizing the gravity of what she had done. Mayor Carter took a deep breath, but her eyes never left the woman's face. "I think it's time we had a proper conversation," she said. And just like that, the once confident woman was left speechless, her accusations hanging in the air. That morning had started off like any other for Malik. He was up early, lacing up his sneakers and grabbing his basketball before heading out to the park. It was a crisp Saturday, and the streets were quiet, save for a few early risers walking their dogs or jogging. Malik loved mornings like these. They gave him a sense of peace, a moment to himself before the world fully woke up. The basketball court was empty when he arrived, just as he liked it. He dribbled, shot hoops, and worked on his free throws, lost in the rhythm of the game. An hour passed before he decided to take a break. He sat on the bench, scrolling through his phone, when he realized he was supposed to meet his mom downtown in half an hour. His mom had a big day planned. Breakfast at their favorite diner, followed by a community event where she was scheduled to speak. She'd asked Malik to come along, and though he wasn't always thrilled about sitting through speeches, he loved seeing her in action. Mayor Carter was a force to be reckoned with, and Malik admired her more than anyone. He jogged over to the nearby parking lot where they had planned to meet. His mom was running late, which wasn't unusual on days when she had back-to-back commitments. Malik leaned against a lamppost, bouncing his basketball idly. That's when he noticed the woman. She was standing a few cars away, staring at him. At first, he thought she might just be waiting for someone, but then she started pacing, glancing at him every few seconds. Malik ignored her, focusing on his phone. But the longer she lingered, the more uneasy he felt. Finally, she walked toward him, her face pinched with suspicion. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Malik looked up, confused. "I'm waiting for my mom," he said simply. The woman frowned, crossing her arms. "Are you sure about that? You've been standing here for a while. Seems suspicious to me." Malik blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm just waiting," he repeated. But the woman didn't seem convinced. She pulled out her phone, dialing quickly. Malik heard her say, "Yes, I'd like to report someone suspicious in the parking lot. He's just standing here, and I don't think he belongs." Malik's heart sank. He had heard stories like this before, but he never thought he'd find himself in one. He stayed where he was, clutching his basketball, as the woman continued to glare at him. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled into the lot. The officer stepped out, approaching Malik with cautious authority. "Is everything all right here?" the officer asked, looking between Malik and the woman. "No," the woman said quickly. "He's been hanging around my car, and I'm worried he's up to something." Malik stayed calm, explaining his situation, but the woman was insistent, and the officer, following protocol, decided to investigate further. That's when Malik's mom arrived, turning the entire situation on its head. Now the parking lot was still, the air thick with unspoken words. The officer glanced nervously at Mayor Carter, then back at the woman, who was visibly shaken. Malik stood quietly by his mom, his expression neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Mayor Carter folded her arms, waiting for someone to speak. The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began, addressing the woman, "it seems there's been a misunderstanding." But before he could finish, Mayor Carter raised a hand, cutting him off. "Misunderstanding?" she repeated, her tone icy. She looked directly at the woman. "Is that what you call this?" The woman stammered, "I didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what?" Mayor Carter's voice was calm, but her words hit like a hammer. The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between his duty and the unfolding drama. Mayor Carter turned her attention back to him. "I'd like to see the report you plan to file," she said firmly, "every detail." The woman's face crumpled, and she took a step back, as if trying to retreat from the weight of her actions. But Mayor Carter wasn't finished. "Let's make sure everything is documented properly," she said. The woman gasped, realizing the full extent of what was about to happen. Mayor Carter's words hummed in the air, as heavy as the tension that gripped the small parking lot. The officer nodded, his face serious, and reached for his notepad. The woman's nervous glances darted from Malik to the mayor, and then to the officer, clearly struggling to find a way out of the mess she'd created. "I didn't mean any harm," the woman said weakly, her voice trembling. "I was just being cautious." Malik's mom fixed her with a stare that could slice through steel. "Cautious? Is that what you call accusing a teenager of a crime for standing in a parking lot?" The woman opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked like she might cry, but Malik felt no sympathy. His heart pounded in his chest, not out of fear anymore, but out of frustration. How many times had he been told to keep his head down, stay out of trouble, and be polite, only for something like this to happen anyway? The officer cleared his throat, his pen poised over the notepad. "Ma'am," he addressed the woman, "I need your name for the report." The woman's eyes widened. "My name?" she repeated, as if the very idea of being held accountable was shocking. "Is that really necessary?" Mayor Carter's expression hardened. "Yes, it is. You made an accusation against my son, and now you'll be part of the official record." "I didn't know he was your son," the woman blurted out, as if that somehow made her actions acceptable. Mayor Carter tilted her head slightly, her tone unyielding. "And if he wasn't, what then? Would you still be so quick to assume he was a threat?" The woman stammered, but no coherent words came out. The officer, sensing the growing tension, stepped in. "Let's get this done quickly," he said, jotting down her name as she reluctantly provided it. "This report will document what happened, including your call and the response." Malik watched in silence, his grip on the basketball tightening. He felt his mom's hand briefly rest on his shoulder, a silent message that she was there for him as always. When the officer finished, he looked up at the mayor. "Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mayor Carter?" She nodded. "Yes, I want to ensure this incident is reviewed thoroughly. Malik wasn't doing anything wrong, yet he's the one who's been humiliated. This kind of profiling is unacceptable." The officer nodded, his expression somber. "Understood." The woman, still pale, tried to slink away, but Mayor Carter wasn't done. "Wait," she called after her. The woman froze. "You owe my son an apology." The woman hesitated, her lips trembling. Finally she muttered, "I'm sorry." Mayor Carter raised an eyebrow. "Louder, so he can hear it." "I'm sorry," the woman said again, her voice louder but still shaking. Malik nodded, not because he forgave her, but because he wanted this to be over. His mom seemed to sense this and gave a small nod of approval. "You could go now," Mayor Carter said, her tone dismissive. The woman didn't need to be told twice. She hurried away, nearly tripping over her own feet as she climbed into her car and sped off. The officer lingered for a moment, looking at Malik. "You okay, kid?" Malik gave a small shrug. "I'm fine." Mayor Carter spoke before the officer could say more. "Thank you for your assistance, officer. We'll handle it from here." The officer nodded, tipping his hat slightly before returning to his patrol car. Soon it was just Malik and his mom standing in the quiet parking lot. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mayor Carter sighed, her expression softening as she turned to her son. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said gently. "I wish I could protect you from every one of these moments." Malik looked up at her, his voice calm but firm. "You already do." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let's get out of here. We got a busy day ahead." Malik nodded, and they headed toward her SUV. But just as they reached the car, Malik paused. "Mom," he said quietly. She turned to him. "Yes." "Why do people still think like that, even when they know it's wrong?" Mayor Carter sighed, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Some people are afraid of what they don't understand, and fear makes them act in ways that hurt others." Malik frowned, processing her words. "Will it ever change?" His mom's eyes were serious but hopeful. "It will, Malik, but only if we keep standing up to it. People like her don't get to decide who you are." Malik nodded slowly, his mom's words sinking in. He wasn't just angry anymore, he was determined. He wouldn't let moments like these define him. They climbed into the SUV, ready to move forward. But as they drove away, neither of them could shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Later that day, at the community event, Mayor Carter stood on stage, addressing a large crowd. Malik watched from the front row, his mom's words still echoing in his mind. "We must hold each other accountable," she said, her voice drawn and clear. "Prejudice and fear have no place in our community. It's up to all of us to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, feels safe and valued." The crowd erupted into applause, but Malik's mind was already racing ahead. He wasn't just listening, he was thinking about what he could do to make a difference. As the event wrapped up, Malik noticed someone standing off to the side, a young reporter with a notepad, watching his mom intently. The reporter caught Malik's eye and smiled, motioning for him to come over. "Hi," she said, introducing herself. "I'm Rachel. Do you have a minute to talk?" Malik hesitated, glancing at his mom, who was still busy shaking hands with attendees. "About what?" Rachel smiled. "About what happened this morning. I heard about it, and I think it's a story worth telling." Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was his chance to speak out, to share his side of what happened. But was he ready for the spotlight? Before he could answer, his mom approached, her expression curious. "Everything all right?" Rachel looked at Mayor Carter, then back at Malik. "I think so," she said. "But that depends on whether Malik is ready to share his story." Malik glanced between them, feeling the weight of the decision in front of him. He knew this could be the start of something important. He took a deep breath. "Let's do it." Rachel's eyes lit up as she quickly flipped open her notepad. "Great," she said, pulling out a recorder. "Let's start from the beginning. Malik, can you tell me what happened this morning?" Mayor Carter gave Malik an encouraging nod before stepping aside to give him space. Malik sat down on a nearby bench, gripping the basketball that had been his silent companion throughout the ordeal. "It was supposed to be a regular day," Malik began, his voice steady but low. "I was just waiting for my mom like we planned. Then that woman showed up." He recounted the events, detailing how the woman had accused him without reason, how the officer had arrived, and how his mom's sudden appearance had shifted the entire situation. Rachel listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes, but never interrupting. "Did you feel scared?" she asked gently. Malik thought about it for a moment. "Not scared," he said slowly. "More tired. It's like, no matter what I do, people like her just see me as a problem." Rachel nodded, her expression sympathetic. "And when your mom arrived, what went through your mind?" Malik allowed himself a small smile. "Relief, but also pride. She didn't just back me up. She made sure everyone knew that what happened wasn't okay." Rachel scribbled a few more notes, then looked up. "Your mom's speech today was powerful. Do you think her position as mayor makes a difference in situations like this?" Malik nodded. "Yeah, definitely. People listen to her. But it shouldn't take someone being a mayor or important for them to get respect. That's what bugs me the most." Rachel leaned back slightly, tapping her pen against her chin. "That's a strong point, Malik. It sounds like you're not just thinking about what happened to you, but how to prevent it from happening to others." Malik nodded again, more confidently this time. "Yeah, I mean, I'm just a kid, but maybe if more people hear about this, they'll start to think twice before judging someone." Rachel smiled, clearly impressed. "You're not just a kid, Malik. You've got a voice, and it's worth hearing." Mayor Carter returned, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. He gets that from his mom, she said with a proud smile. Rachel chuckled, standing up and offering her hand. Thank you, Malik. I think your story is going to resonate with a lot of people. Malik shook her hand, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. Thanks for telling it. Rachel nodded, then turned to Mayor Carter. And thank you, Madam Mayor. Your leadership is inspiring. Mayor Carter gave a polite nod. Just doing my job. As Rachel walked away, Malik felt a surge of energy. The encounter with the woman earlier had been humiliating, but now it felt like something good might come from it. The next morning, the local news site published Rachel's story. The headline read, Mayor's son profiled in shocking parking lot incident. Malik's heart raced as he read through the article. It detailed everything, from the woman's baseless accusations to Mayor Carter's firm response. By midday, the story had gone viral. Social media was ablaze with discussions, and Malik's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Some messages were supportive, while others were less kind. Mom, have you seen this? Malik asked, holding up his phone as they sat at the kitchen table. Mayor Carter glanced over, her face unreadable. I have, she said. It's getting a lot of attention. Malik hesitated. Is that a good thing? His mom gave him a thoughtful look. It depends. Attention can lead to change, but it can also bring out the worst in people. Malik frowned. You mean like trolls? She nodded. Exactly. Some people will support us, but others will try to tear us down. The important thing is to stay focused on the message. Just then, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and sighed. Looks like I've got another interview request. Malik raised an eyebrow. Another? How many have you done already? This will be the fourth today, she said, standing up to take the call. It's not just local anymore. National outlets are picking it up. Malik watched as his mom walked out of the room, her voice confident as she spoke to the reporter. He couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and anxiety. The story was out there now, and there was no turning back. By the end of the week, the incident had sparked a broader conversation. Town hall meetings were scheduled, and community members were invited to share their own experiences with profiling and discrimination. Mayor Carter was at the forefront of these discussions, but she wasn't alone. She made sure Malik had a seat at the table too. At one of the meetings, Malik listened as people from all walks of life shared their stories. Some were heartbreaking, others infuriating, but all of them painted a picture of a community grappling with deep-seated issues. When it was Malik's turn to speak, he stood up, his hands slightly sweaty. He looked out at the crowd, taking a deep breath. I didn't ask for any of this, he began. I was just waiting for my mom, and suddenly I was a suspect. That's not okay. But what really hit me was how normal it felt, like part of me wasn't even surprised. The room was silent, everyone hanging on his words. That's the problem, Malik continued. It shouldn't feel normal. And it's not just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been judged before they even had a chance to explain themselves. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Malik sat down, his heart pounding but his spirit lifted. He had spoken his truth, and people were listening. As the weeks went on, the momentum continued to build. The city council proposed new training programs for law enforcement and community members, focusing on bias awareness and de-escalation. Schools held assemblies on empathy and inclusion, and local businesses displayed signs promoting equality. But not everyone was on board. Anonymous threats started appearing online, targeting both Mayor Carter and her family. Malik found himself looking over his shoulder more often, and his mom tightened security around their home. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Malik voiced his concerns. Mom, what if this gets worse? What if someone tries to hurt us? Mayor Carter reached over, taking his hand in hers. We're stronger than they are, Malik. They use fear because they're afraid of change, but we're not backing down. Malik nodded, her words giving him strength. But deep down, he knew the fight was far from over. It was late one night when the phone rang again. Mayor Carter answered, her expression serious as she listened. When she hung up, she turned to Malik, her face unreadable. There's been a new development, she said, something we need to address immediately. Before Malik could ask what she meant, there was a loud knock at the door. They both froze for a moment, then exchanged a look. Stay here, Mayor Carter said, heading toward the door. Malik watched as she opened it, revealing a man in a dark suit standing on the porch. His face was grim, and he held a folder under his arm. We need to talk, the man said. It's urgent. Malik felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was happening, it was serious. Mayor Carter stepped aside to let the man in, her expression calm but alert. Malik stayed seated, gripping the armrest of the couch. The man entered, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. He glanced at Malik, then back at the mayor. "Is this about the threats?" Mayor Carter asked, shutting the door behind him. The man nodded, his face grim. "Yes, but it's more than that. We traced some of the online activity to a local group." Malik sat up straighter, his heart pounding. "A group? Like hate group?" The man nodded. "They've been escalating their rhetoric since the parking lot incident went public. We believe they're planning a demonstration, or worse." Mayor Carter's jaw tightened. "What kind of demonstration?" The man handed her the folder. "A protest, but there's chatter about inciting violence. We've increased surveillance, and we're coordinating with local law enforcement to ensure your family's safety." Malik's stomach churned. "They're doing all this because of what happened to me." The man turned to him, his tone serious but not unkind. "You become a symbol, Malik. For some people, that's a threat." Mayor Carter flipped through the folder, her eyes scanning the pages. "When is this supposed to happen?" "Tomorrow afternoon, outside City Hall," the man replied. "We're taking every precaution, but you should both be prepared." Malik felt a lump in his throat. He had never imagined that speaking out could lead to something like this. His mom, however, looked as composed as ever. "Thank you for the warning," she said, closing the folder. "We'll be ready." The man nodded, then glanced at Malik. "Stay strong, kid. You're making a difference." With that, he left, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Malik stared at the closed door, his mind racing. "Mom, what if someone gets hurt?" he asked quietly. Mayor Carter sat down beside him, placing a hand on his back. "We can't control what other people do, Malik, but we can control how we respond. Tomorrow, we'll stand together, just like we always do." Malik nodded, though the weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. The next day, the tension in the air was palpable. City Hall was surrounded by police barricades, and officers in riot gear stood at every corner. A small crowd had already gathered by the time Malik and his mom arrived, their faces a mix of determination and unease. Reporters milled around, their cameras trained on the growing scene. Malik recognized Rachel among them, giving him a quick nod of encouragement as they passed. Mayor Carter walked with purpose, her head held high. Malik followed closely, feeling a mixture of pride and anxiety. They entered City Hall, where a team of officials and security personnel were waiting. "Madam Mayor," one of the officers greeted her, "we're ready when you are." Mayor Carter nodded, then turned to Malik. "You'll stay inside until I finish my speech." Malik opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off with a firm look. "It's safer this way." Reluctantly, he agreed. He watched as she stepped outside on the podium, the crowd quieting as she approached the microphone. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "Today, we stand together against hate, against fear, and against division." The crowd cheered, but the noise was quickly drowned out by the sound of a new group approaching. Malik peered out the window, his heart sinking as he saw them. Dozens of people holding signs with hateful slogans, their faces twisted with anger. The protesters pushed against the barricades, shouting over the mayor's speech. The police held their ground, but the tension was rapidly escalating. Mayor Carter didn't flinch. She continued speaking, her voice rising above the chaos. "We will not be intimidated," she declared. "This community is stronger than hate, and we will prove it." Just as the crowd roared in support, a loud bang echoed through the square. Malik's heart stopped as the crowd scattered, panic spreading like wildfire. He turned toward the door, ready to run outside, but a security guard blocked his path. "Stay here, Malik," the guard shouted. "What's happening?" Malik yelled, his voice breaking. The guard didn't answer, his focus on the unfolding chaos outside. Malik's hands trembled as he clutched his phone, desperately texting his mom. "Are you okay?" Seconds felt like hours before his phone buzzed with a reply. "I'm fine. Stay where you are." Malik's breathing slowed slightly, but his fear didn't subside. He could hear the chants and shouts outside, mingling with the sound of sirens. Whatever had started, it wasn't over yet. Suddenly the door burst open, and Mayor Carter rushed in, flanked by two officers. Her face was calm but urgent. "Malik, we need to leave now," she said. "What happened?" Malik asked, his voice shaking. "There was a firecracker, someone trying to scare the crowd," she explained quickly. "But it's under control. We're moving you to a safe location." Malik grabbed his things, following his mom as they were escorted through a back exit. The streets were eerily quiet as they climbed into an unmarked car, the driver taking off immediately. As they drove, Malik's mind raced. He had thought the worst was over, but now it felt like they were only just beginning to understand the lengths some people would go to spread their hate. He glanced at his mom, who sat silently beside him, her expression unreadable. Malik knew she was strong, but even she couldn't face this alone. "Mom," he said softly, "what do we do now?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and concern. "We keep going," she said, "because that's what they're afraid of." The car sped through the quiet streets, its tires humming against the asphalt. Malik glanced out the window, watching as familiar landmarks blurred past. His mind was still racing, replaying the chaos from the protest. After what felt like an eternity, the driver pulled into a gated compound, a secure location used by city officials during emergencies. Malik and his mom were ushered into a small, well-fortified building where a few other staff members were already waiting. The air inside was tense, the low hum of urgent conversations filling the space. Mayor Carter immediately took charge, conferring with her aides and security team. Malik sat on a couch in the corner, his basketball resting at his feet. He felt restless, his hands twitching as he tried to process everything. His mom returned a few minutes later, her expression softer but still serious. She sat beside him, her hand briefly brushing his shoulder. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Malik shrugged. "I don't know. It's like everything just got real." Mayor Carter nodded. "It did. But we're safe now, and that's what matters." Malik looked down at his hands. "Why do they hate us so much?" His mom sighed, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. Some people are afraid of losing control. They see equality as a threat to their power, their way of life, so they lash out, trying to intimidate anyone who challenges them. "But we didn't do anything wrong," Malik said, his voice tinged with frustration. "No, we didn't," she agreed. "And that's exactly why we can't back down. If we give in to their fear, they win." Malik nodded slowly, though the weight of her words didn't make the fear any easier to bear. Later that evening, the security team gathered everyone for a briefing. The head of security, a tall man with a commanding presence, addressed the room. "The situation at City Hall has been contained," he said. "No one was seriously injured, and we've identified the individual responsible for the firecracker. They're in custody now." A wave of relief swept through the room, though the tension didn't fully dissipate. "However," he continued, "we've received credible threats indicating this group may attempt further actions in the coming days. We're increasing security around all city officials and their families." Mayor Carter raised her hand. "What about the community? How do we reassure them that they're safe?" The head of security nodded. "We're coordinating with local police to increase patrols in high-risk areas. We'll also hold a press conference tomorrow to address public concerns." Mayor Carter glanced at Malik, then back at the security team. "I want my son to be part of that press conference." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Malik's eyes widened. "What, me?" His mom placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're the reason this conversation is happening, Malik. People need to hear your voice." The head of security looked uncertain. "Madam Mayor, are you sure that's wise? It could make him a bigger target." "I understand the risks," she said firmly, "but Malik's story is powerful. It's time the world hears it." Malik swallowed hard, his mind racing. The thought of speaking in front of a crowd, especially under these circumstances, was terrifying. But he also knew his mom was right. This wasn't just about him. It was about standing up for something bigger. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll do it." His mom smiled, her pride evident. "That's my boy." The next morning, the press conference was held at a secure location. Dozens of reporters gathered in the room, their cameras and microphones aimed at the podium. Malik sat in the front row beside his mom, his heart pounding as he waited for his turn to speak. Mayor Carter stepped up first, addressing the recent events with her usual poise. She condemned the hate group's actions, reaffirming the city's commitment to justice and equality. The crowd listened intently, their expressions a mix of concern and admiration. Then, it was Malik's turn. As his mom introduced him, Malik stood, his legs feeling like jelly. He took a deep breath and walked to the podium, the bright lights making him squint. He gripped the edges of the lectern, his palms sweaty. Hi," he began, his voice shaky. "My name is Malik Carter, and I guess you've all heard about what happened to me last week." The room was silent, every eye on him. Malik swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. "I didn't think waiting for my mom would turn into all this," he said, gesturing vaguely. "But it did, and now people are trying to scare us into silence." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But I'm not going to stay quiet," he said, his voice growing stronger. Because this isn't just about me. It's about every kid who's been judged before anyone even knew their name. It's about showing people like those protesters that their hate won't win. The room erupted into applause. Malik felt a surge of confidence, the fear that had gripped him earlier starting to fade. "We're better than this," he continued. "And if we stand together, we can make sure no one else has to go through what I did." As he stepped back from the podium, the applause grew louder. Malik returned to his seat, his mom giving him a proud squeeze on the shoulder. "You did amazing," she whispered. For the first time in days, Malik felt a genuine smile spread across his face. But even as the press conference wrapped up, the battle was far from over. That night, as Malik scrolled through his phone, he came across a chilling post. It was a photo of him and his mom at the press conference, with the caption, "We're watching you." Malik's stomach dropped. He immediately showed the post to his mom, who called the head of security. Within minutes, their house was swarming with officers, investigating the threat. As Malik lay in bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was closing in. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions. What were they to do next? And how far were these people willing to go to silence him? Malik didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain, he wasn't backing down. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, but for Malik, the usual warmth of a new day felt distant. He barely touched his breakfast, the ominous message from the night before still fresh in his mind. His mom, ever the steady force, sat across from him, sipping her coffee while scrolling through her phone. "Security's doubling patrols around the house," she said, glancing up. "And they traced that post to a burner account. They're working on finding out who's behind it." Malik nodded, but the weight of the situation lingered. "What if they don't find them?" he asked quietly. Mayor Carter set her mug down, leaning forward. "Then we stay vigilant. We can't control their actions, but we won't live in fear, Malik. Fear is exactly what they want." Malik appreciated her strength, but a part of him couldn't shake the anxiety creeping in. He was 16 after all, and now he felt like a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game. The sound of her phone buzzing interrupted his thoughts. She glanced at the screen, her eyes narrowing. "It's Rachel," she said, answering the call. "Rachel, what's going on?" Malik watched as his mom's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "When did this happen?" she asked, standing from her chair. "Is everyone okay?" Malik's heart skipped a beat. He leaned forward, trying to piece together the conversation from his mom's side. "We're on our way," she said before hanging up. She turned to Malik, her face serious. "There's been an incident at the community center." "What happened?" Malik asked, already grabbing his jacket. "Someone vandalized it overnight," she said, grabbing her keys. "They spray-painted hate messages on the walls and smashed some of the windows." Malik's stomach clenched. The community center was a safe space, a symbol of unity and hope. Seeing it targeted felt like a punch to the gut. They drove in silence, the city streets passing by in a blur. When they arrived at the community center, a crowd had already gathered. Police officers were on site, cordoning off the area as reporters swarmed the scene. Malik stepped out of the car, his heart sinking at the sight before him. The vibrant murals that once adorned the center's walls were now defaced with hateful slurs and symbols. Shattered glass crunched underfoot as volunteers and community leaders tried to clean up the mess. Mayor Carter wasted no time, speaking to the officers and coordinating with the cleanup crew. Malik, meanwhile, stood frozen, taking in the destruction. He spotted Rachel among the reporters, her face a mix of determination and sadness. She waved him over. "Malik, this is awful," she said, gesturing to the defaced building. "Do you want to say anything on record?" Malik hesitated. His instinct was to stay silent, to let the adults handle it. But then he remembered his mom's words, "Theater is what they want." He took a deep breath. "Yeah, I do." Rachel raised her phone to record. "Whenever you're ready." Malik looked directly into the camera, his voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "This isn't just an attack on the community center," he said. "It's an attack on everything we stand for, unity, equality, and hope. But no matter how much they try to scare us, we're not going to stop fighting for what's right. They can break our windows and paint their hate, but they can't break our spirit." Rachel nodded, lowering her phone. "That was powerful, Malik. Thank you." As Malik walked back to his mom, he noticed something he hadn't expected. People in the crowd nodding in agreement, their faces reflecting a shared determination. The hate that had tried to divide them was, in some ways, bringing them closer together. Mayor Carter put a hand on his shoulder. "You did good," she said softly. Malik looked at her, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. We all did. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The community rallied together, repainting the murals and repairing the damage to the center. Donations poured in, not just from locals, but from supporters across the country who had heard about the incident through social media and news coverage. But as the community grew stronger, so did the threats. Malik and his mom received more anonymous messages, some vague, others chillingly specific. The security detail around their home was tightened, and every trip outside was meticulously planned. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Malik's phone buzzed with another notification. This time, it was an email. "We know where you'll be tomorrow. Watch your back." Malik's hands shook as he showed it to his mom. Her expression darkened, but she quickly composed herself. "We'll forward this to the police," she said, her voice firm. "They'll trace it." Malik nodded, though the knot in his stomach only grew tighter. "Why won't they just stop?" he asked, his voice breaking. His mom pulled him into a hug. "Because they're losing, Malik. Every time we stand up to them, every time we refuse to back down, they lose a little more of their power." Malik clung to her words, drawing strength from her unwavering resolve. But as the hours passed and the weight of the threats loomed larger, he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. The next day, Malik and his mom were scheduled to attend a town hall meeting at a local high school. Security was tighter than ever, with officers stationed at every entrance and plainclothes guards blending into the crowd. The event began smoothly, with community leaders and residents discussing ways to combat hate and promote inclusion. Malik listened intently, his earlier anxiety fading as he focused on the positive energy in the room. But as the meeting neared its end, a sudden commotion erupted near the back of the auditorium. Malik turned just in time to see a man pushing through the crowd, shouting angrily. "This is all a lie," the man yelled, his face red with fury. "You're brainwashing our kids." Before anyone could react, he reached into his jacket. Malik's heart stopped. "Gun!" someone screamed, and the room erupted into chaos. Officers tackled the man to the ground, disarming him before he could do any harm. But the panic had already set in, people scrambling for the exits and ducking under chairs. Malik found himself frozen, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. His mom grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a side exit where their security detail was waiting. "Come on, Malik," she urged, her voice steady but urgent. They made it outside, the cool evening air hitting Malik like a slap. He leaned against the wall, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The man had been stopped, but the message was clear. The fight was far from over. The tension outside the high school was electric. Sirens wailed in the distance as more police units arrived. People milled around in a state of shock, some crying, others angrily recounting the events. Malik stood by his mom, his legs still trembling from the rush of adrenaline. Mayor Carter was already on her phone, speaking in a calm but authoritative tone. "Yes, he's in custody," she said. "No shots were fired, but we need to increase security at all future events." Malik watched as his mom handled the crisis with her usual poise, but inside he felt a storm brewing. This wasn't just another threat, it was a direct attempt to silence them. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She ended her call and turned to him, her expression softening. "I'm here, Malik. Talk to me." He hesitated, searching for the right words. I don't know if I can keep doing this," he admitted. "It's like every time we try to stand up, they push back harder." Mayor Carter knelt slightly to meet his eyes. "I won't lie to you, Malik. This fight is hard, and it's scary. But we're not alone. Look around." Malik glanced up, noticing the crowd of people surrounding them. Volunteers, community leaders, and even strangers had come together, supporting each other in the aftermath of the incident. He saw familiar faces offering comfort and encouragement, and it hit him. This was bigger than just him and his mom. "These people are here because they believe in what we're fighting for," Mayor Carter continued, "and they're not giving up even after what just happened. That's the kind of strength we're building together." Malik nodded slowly, her words sinking in. The fear was still there, but so was a growing sense of resolve. Later that night, Malik lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the events of the evening, the man's angry shouts, the flash of the weapon, the chaos that followed. It all felt surreal, like a scene from a movie he wished he could turn off. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling him from his thoughts. He reached for it, half expecting another anonymous threat. But it was a text from Rachel. "Rachel, hey, just wanted to check on you. You okay?" Malik hesitated for a moment before replying. "Malik, I'm fine, I guess. Still trying to process everything. Her response came almost immediately. Rachel, that's understandable. You were incredibly brave tonight. The whole city is talking about how you and your mom handled it. Malik stared at the screen, her words providing a small but much-needed boost. Malik, thanks. It just feels like no matter what we do, it's never enough. There was a brief pause before Rachel replied again. Rachel, change takes time, Malik. But every step you take inspires someone else to stand up too. That's how we win. Malik read her message twice, letting it sink in. She was right. Even when it felt like progress was slow, every act of defiance against hate mattered. He set his phone down and closed his eyes, determined to get some rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace. The next day, Malik and his mom were back in action. They held a press conference to address the incident, flanked by law enforcement and community leaders. Mayor Carter spoke first, her voice firm but empathetic. Last night's events were a stark reminder of the challenges we face, she said. But they also showed us the strength of our community. We will not let fear dictate our actions. We will continue to stand together, united against hate. When it was Malik's turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone with newfound confidence. I was scared last night, he admitted, but I'm not letting that fear stop me. Because every time we show up, every time we refuse to back down, we're sending a message. The hate doesn't have a place here. The crowd erupted in applause, and Malik felt a surge of pride. He wasn't just surviving this fight, he was actively shaping it. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the city began to shift. The community's response to the attempted attack was one of unity and resilience. Vigils were held, rallies grew larger, and more people came forward to share their stories of facing discrimination. Malik found himself at the center of it all, speaking at events and participating in discussions about how to make lasting changes. But the threats didn't stop. One day, as Malik and his mom were leaving City Hall, they found a note tucked under their car's windshield wiper. This isn't over. Mayor Carter handed the note to their security detail without a word, her expression unreadable. Malik felt his stomach twist, but he reminded himself of what his mom had said, fear is what they want. Ready to head home? She asked, her tone calm. Malik nodded. Yeah, let's go. As they drove away, Malik couldn't help but think about how far they had come, and how much further they still had to go. He didn't know what the future held, but he was certain of one thing: he wasn't fighting alone. The drive home was quiet, the tension thick in the air despite the familiar hum of the city streets. Malik stared out the window, watching the world pass by. His thoughts drifted between the note and the faces of the crowd at the press conference earlier. He knew the support was there, but the shadow of the threats loomed large. When they pulled into their driveway, 2 security guards stationed at the front door gave them a brief nod. Malik felt a strange mix of reassurance and unease. This was his new normal, constant vigilance, eyes always watching. Inside, the house felt too quiet. Malik set his basketball down by the door, a ritual that usually brought comfort but now felt hollow. His mom headed straight to the kitchen, pulling out a folder of papers from her briefcase. We'll talk to the chief tomorrow about that note, she said without looking up. I want every leaf followed. Malik hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to bring up the thoughts swirling in his head. Finally, he blurted out, Do you ever get tired of all this? Mayor Carter paused, looking up from her papers. Her eyes softened as she motioned for him to sit at the kitchen table. All the time, she admitted. But this fight isn't about feeling tired or scared. It's about pushing through because what we're doing matters. Malik sat down, fidgeting with the edge of his hoodie. But what if? What if it never stops? The threats, the hate, all of it. His mom reached across the table, placing her hand over his. It won't stop overnight. Change is slow, and the people clinging to hate won't give up easily. But every time we stand up, we're making it harder for them to win. And one day, Malik, there won't just be fewer. They'll be powerless. Malik nodded, her words both comforting and sobering. I just don't want anyone to get hurt. Neither do I, she said, her voice steady. That's why we're doing this together. We protect each other and the people who believe in us, and we don't let fear make our decisions. The next morning, Malik awoke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. He groggily reached for it, expecting another flood of messages about last night's press conference. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. Unknown, today's your last warning. Stay silent or we'll make sure you regret it. Malik's heart raced. He sat up, staring at the message. It wasn't like the vague threats before. This one felt personal, immediate. He quickly took a screenshot and forwarded it to his mom. Within minutes, Mayor Carter was in his room, her face a mask of calm determination. She handed the phone to a security guard standing in the doorway. "Get this to the chief," she instructed. "I want a trace on that number." The guard nodded and left. Malik hugged his knees to his chest, his thoughts spiraling. "Malik," his mom said gently, sitting on the edge of his bed. "We're going to find out who's behind this, but I need you to stay strong. Can you do that?" Malik nodded, though the knot in his stomach remained. What if they actually do something this time? "We'll be ready," she said firmly, "and they'll be held accountable. I promise you." By afternoon, the police had traced the number to a burner phone, leaving them with few leads. Despite the lack of concrete information, Mayor Carter pushed forward with their planned town hall event that evening. Malik wasn't sure if it was bravery or stubbornness, but he knew better than to argue. The venue was packed, more security present than usual. Malik scanned the crowd from his seat on the stage, his nerves buzzing. His mom spoke first, addressing the threats head-on. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice echoing through the hall. "These attempts to silence us will not work. Hate has no place in our community, and we will not be intimidated." The crowd erupted in applause, the energy palpable. Malik felt a spark of courage as he prepared to speak. When his turn came, he stepped up to the microphone, his hands only slightly shaking. "I've learned a lot over the past few weeks," he began. "One thing I've realized is that standing up to hate isn't just about being brave. It's about refusing to let fear control your life." He paused, scanning the faces in the audience. "I'm scared just like anyone would be. But I won't let that stop me. Because every time we stand up, we're showing the people who spread hate that they're the ones who should be afraid. Afraid of losing their power." The crowd's applause was thunderous, and Malik felt a wave of pride wash over him. He glanced at his mom, who gave him a small nod of approval. But just as the applause began to die down, there was a sudden piercing sound from the back of the hall. Malik froze, his heart leaping into his throat. The sound repeated, a loud metallic clatter, followed by shouts. Security guards rushed toward the disturbance, their voices commanding. Malik couldn't see what was happening, but the tension in the room skyrocketed. His mom quickly moved to his side, her hand gripping his arm. "Stay close," she whispered, her eyes scanning the crowd. The room buzzed with nervous energy as the guard subdued someone near the exit. Malik's pulse raced as he tried to make sense of the chaos. Finally, one of the guards approached the stage, speaking quietly to Mayor Carter. She nodded, then turned to the audience. "There's some danger," she announced, her voice calm but firm. "Someone tried to cause a disruption, but the situation is under control." The audience began to settle, though the unease lingered. Malik exhaled, his body still tense. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. As they left the venue under heavy guard, Malik's mind raced with questions. Who was behind the disruption, and how much further were they willing to go? The ride home was tense, the night cloaked in a silence that even the hum of the car engine couldn't break. Malik sat beside his mom, his hands clenched into fists. His mind was spinning, replaying the incident at the town hall. Though no one had been hurt, the disruption felt like a warning, a promise that the people targeting them weren't finished. Once they were back home, the security team did a thorough sweep of the house. Malik and Mayor Carter waited in the living room, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional murmur of the guards checking in. Finally, the head of security returned. "All clear," he said. "We've increased patrols in the area, and the individual from tonight is in custody." Mayor Carter nodded. "Good. Any leads on their connection to the threats?" The guard hesitated. "They're not talking yet, but we'll keep pressing." Malik exhaled slowly. His mom thanked the guard, and once they were alone, she turned to him. "You did well tonight," she said softly, "even with everything going on." Malik shook his head. "It doesn't feel like it. Every time I think we're making progress, something else happens. I'm tired, Mom." Mayor Carter sat beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his back. "I know you are," she said. "But remember, every step we take is pushing them further into the light. They're acting out because they're losing control." Malik nodded, though the weariness in his bones lingered. He wanted to believe her, to feel the same resolve she always seemed to carry. But doubt clung to him like a shadow. The next day, Malik woke to a new wave of news coverage about the town hall. Reporters dissected every detail of the disruption, some praising the community's resilience, others speculating about the dangers of escalating tensions. Malik scrolled through his phone, his feed flooded with messages of support and, unsurprisingly, more hateful comments. He tried to focus on the positive ones, but the negativity had a way of seeping in. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called. His mom entered, a tablet in hand. "I want to show you something," she said, sitting beside him. She opened a video, a clip from a local news station. It showed footage from the town hall, including Malik's speech. But what stood out was the anchor's commentary afterward. Despite the attempted disruption, the Carter family remains steadfast in their mission, the anchor said. Their courage has inspired a growing movement, with supporters rallying together to show that hate has no place in this city. The clip cut to interviews with community members, each expressing admiration for Malik and his mom. One woman said, "Malik's bravery gives me hope. If a teenager can stand up against this kind of hate, so can I." Malik felt a lump rise in his throat. The support was real, and was growing. "See," his mom said, smiling, "you're making an impact." Malik managed a small smile. "It helps to hear that." Mayor Carter ruffled his hair gently. "Good, because we've got more work to do." That afternoon, the phone rang with an unexpected call. Mayor Carter answered, her expression shifting from curiosity to intrigue. "Malik," she said after hanging up, "we've been invited to speak at the state capitol." Malik's eyes widened. "The capitol? Like in front of lawmakers?" She nodded. "They want us to address the recent incidents and discuss ways to combat hate crimes statewide." Malik's stomach twisted with both excitement and nerves. "Do you think it'll help?" "It's a chance to push for real change," she said, "but only if we're ready to face the pressure." Malik took a deep breath, the weight of the opportunity settling on him. "I'm in." A week later, they stood on the steps of the state capitol. The air was crisp, the towering columns of the building adding a sense of gravity to the moment. Malik adjusted his tie nervously, feeling the eyes of the crowd and cameras on him. Mayor Carter placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You got this," she said. As they stepped up to the podium, the buzz of the crowd quieted. Mayor Carter spoke first, her words powerful and precise as she outlined the importance of unity and the need for stronger protections against hate crimes. Then it was Malik's turn. He gripped the edges of the podium, his heart pounding. "I'm just a kid," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I never thought I'd be standing here, speaking to so many people about something so serious. But the truth is, what's happening to me and my family isn't unique. It's happening to people all over, and it needs to stop." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "We can't let fear control our lives. We have to fight back, not with hate, but with courage and action. Because if we don't, they win. And I'm not willing to let that happen." The crowd erupted into applause, and Malik felt a surge of pride. He had spoken his truth, and it resonated. As they left the podium, a lawmaker approached them. "Your speech was powerful," she said, shaking Malik's hand. "I think it's time we turn these words into legislation." Malik exchanged a glance with his mom, hope flickering in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they were on the brink of real change. But as they walked away, Malik couldn't help but feel the weight of the journey ahead. The fight wasn't over, it was just entering a new phase. The ride back from the state capitol was filled with a cautious optimism. Malik leaned his head against the window, watching the landscape blur by. He replayed the moment on the steps, the applause, the lawmakers promised to push for new legislation. For the first time in weeks, it felt like they had taken a decisive step forward. But beneath the hope, a familiar tension lingered. As they neared home, Malik turned to his mom. "Do you think they'll really pass a law, or was that just something politicians say?" Mayor Carter smiled gently. "Change in politics takes time, but the fact that they're even talking about it is progress, and we'll be there to make sure they follow through." Malik nodded, though the uncertainty still gnawed at him. "I just don't want it to be all talk. People are counting on us. And we won't let them down," she said firmly. "This isn't just about speeches or meetings. It's about keeping the pressure on until real change happens." The car pulled into their driveway, where security guards were already waiting. Malik felt a twinge of annoyance at the constant presence of guards, but he understood the necessity. As they stepped inside, his mom's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening. "What is it?" Malik asked. She showed him the message. It was an email, short but chilling. "Nice speech today. Too bad it won't save you." Malik's stomach flipped. "They're still watching us." Mayor Carter nodded, her face set in a determined frown. "Let them watch. They'll see we're not going anywhere." She forwarded the email to the police and security team, then turned to Malik. "We'll tighten precautions, but this doesn't change our mission." Malik admired her strength, but the weight of the threats was wearing on him. He wanted to believe they were making progress, but the persistent danger loomed like a storm cloud. The next morning, Malik woke to a surprising notification on his phone. A viral post from a well-known activist praising his speech at the Capitol. "This young man is a beacon of hope. We stand with you, Malik." The post had thousands of likes and comments, with people from across the country sharing their support. Malik's heart swelled as he read messages of encouragement, but the positivity was mixed with the usual vitriol from anonymous trolls. Still, he focused on the good. The support wasn't just coming from their city anymore, it was national. He showed his mom the post during breakfast. She smiled, though her eyes carried the same cautious hope he felt. "This is big," Malik said. "People are paying attention." "They are," she agreed. "But with more attention comes more responsibility. We have to keep pushing." The day was packed with meetings and planning sessions. Mayor Carter's office was working closely with community leaders to organize a citywide march against hate. Malik was invited to help lead the event, a role he both embraced and dreaded. The thought of standing in front of thousands of people filled him with equal parts excitement and anxiety. That evening, as Malik and his mom reviewed plans for the march, the doorbell rang. One of the security guards answered, and a moment later, he returned with a package. "This just arrived," the guard said, placing the box on the table. "No return address." Mayor Carter's eyes narrowed. "Call the bomb squad," she said immediately. "We're not taking any chances." Malik's pulse quickened as the guards sprang into action, clearing the area and calling in a specialized unit. Within minutes, a team arrived to examine the package. Malik and his mom watched from a safe distance as the technicians carefully opened it. Inside was a simple note, written in large, blocky letters. "You won't make it to the march." The room fell silent. Malik felt his throat tighten as he stared at the words. It wasn't just a threat, it was a direct challenge to their efforts. The head of security spoke first. "We'll increase protection at the march. No one's getting close to either of you." Mayor Carter nodded, her expression unreadable. She turned to Malik, her voice steady. "Are you okay?" Malik swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Yeah," he said, though his hands trembled slightly. "We're still doing the march, right?" "Absolutely," she said without hesitation. "We're not backing down." Malik nodded, drawing strength from her resolve. Fear was still there, but so was a growing determination. They had come too far to let threats stop them now. The day of the march arrived, and the city buzzed with anticipation. Streets were lined with banners bearing messages of unity and hope. Thousands of people gathered, their voices raised in defiance of hate. Malik stood at the front of the crowd, his mom beside him, both wearing matching shirts that read, "Stronger Together." As the march began, the crowd moved as one, a sea of determined faces. Malik held a megaphone, leading chants that echoed through the streets. The energy was electric, a powerful reminder of what they were fighting for. But as they reached the city square, where the final rally was set to take place, Malik's eyes caught a figure moving against the flow of the crowd. A man in a dark hoodie, his face partially obscured, was weaving through the marchers. "Mom," Malik said quietly, nodding toward the man. "Something's off." Mayor Carter followed his gaze, her expression sharpening. She signaled to the security team, who immediately moved toward the figure. Before they could reach him, the man raised his arm, revealing a small device. Malik's heart stopped as he realized what it was, a smoke canister. "Get down!" Someone shouted as the canister hit the ground, releasing a thick cloud of smoke. The crowd scattered in confusion, coughing and stumbling as they tried to move away. Security guards surrounded Malik and his mom, ushering them toward a safe zone. Malik's mind raced, his lungs burning from the smoke. Even in the chaos, he could hear his mom's voice, calm and steady. "Stay close," she said, gripping his arm tightly. Within moments, the police had the situation under control. The man was apprehended, and the smoke began to clear. Despite the disruption, the rally continued, the crowd's chants growing louder, as if to drown out the fear. Malik stood on the stage, his voice hoarse but determined as he spoke into the microphone. "They tried to scare us," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "But look around. We're still here, and we're not going anywhere." The crowd erupted in cheers, their unity stronger than ever. Malik felt a surge of pride and hope. The fight was far from over, but today they had won a battle, and he knew they would keep winning, one step at a time. The energy of the crowd didn't waver for the rest of the rally. People held their signs high, chanting messages of solidarity and defiance. Malik stood beside his mom on the stage, scanning the faces of those who had gathered despite the chaos. Every person was a testament to their cause, a living reminder that fear would not prevail. As the rally wound down, Mayor Carter addressed the crowd one last time. "Today, you've shown the world that hate cannot and will not silence us," she said. "We are stronger together, and we will continue to fight for a future where everyone, no matter their background, feels safe and valued. This is just the beginning." The applause was deafening. Malik felt a deep sense of pride as he raised his fist in solidarity with the crowd. This was the power of unity, and it was a force that no threat could break. That night back at home, the adrenaline finally began to wear off. Malik sat on the couch, his legs stretched out in front of him. His mom joined him, 2 mugs of tea in hand. She passed one to him and sank into the seat beside him. "You were incredible today," she said, her voice warm. Malik smiled tiredly. "I just followed your lead." She chuckled softly, taking a sip of her tea. "It's not easy to stand in front of thousands of people, especially after what happened. But you did it, and you inspired so many people." Malik looked down at his mug, the steam curling upward. "It still feels scary, though. Like, what if they come after us again?" "They might," she admitted, her voice steady. "But we'll face it together, and every time they try to stop us, we'll push back harder." Malik nodded, her words giving him strength. "Do you think this will really make a difference?" "I do," she said. "Change doesn't happen all at once, but it starts with moments like today. Every person who marched, every voice that was heard, they're all part of something bigger." Malik took a deep breath, letting the weight of the day settle. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew they were moving in the right direction. In the days that followed, the march became a national story. News outlets praised the community's resilience, and social media was flooded with photos and videos from the event. Malik and his mom were interviewed by major networks, their message reaching millions. But not everyone was celebrating. The threats continued, some more menacing than before. One morning, as Malik scrolled through his messages, he found another chilling note. "You've made your point. Now disappear, or you'll wish you had." He showed the message to his mom, who immediately forwarded it to the police. But this time, Malik felt a flicker of something different, not just fear but anger. "I'm tired of this," he said, his voice firm. "They keep trying to scare us, but all they're doing is making us stronger." Mayor Carter nodded, her expression serious. "That's exactly what they're afraid of, and it's why we have to keep going." A week later, Malik and his mom were invited to a televised roundtable discussion with other activists and leaders. The topic, how to combat hate and build stronger, more inclusive communities. Malik was nervous as they arrived at the studio, but the familiar presence of his mom helped steady him. They were greeted warmly by the host, who led them to the set. As the cameras rolled, the conversation quickly turned to the recent threats and disruptions. Malik listened intently as each panelist shared their perspective. When it was his turn to speak, he leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've learned that standing up to hate isn't just about speaking out," he said. "It's about creating spaces where people feel safe and supported, where they know they're not alone. That's what my mom and I are trying to do, and it's what this whole movement is about." The host nodded. "Malik, you've shown incredible bravery throughout this journey. What keeps you motivated?" Malik glanced at his mom, then back at the host. "Knowing that every step we take brings us closer to a world where no one has to live in fear, and seeing how many people are willing to stand with us, it reminds me that we're not fighting alone." The discussion continued, touching on policy changes, community initiatives, and the importance of education in breaking down prejudice. By the end of the segment, Malik felt a renewed sense of purpose. As they left the studio, Malik's phone buzzed with new messages, most of them from people who had watched the show. "You're an inspiration, Malik. Keep going. Thank you for speaking up. We need more voices like yours. Your courage gives me hope for the future." Malik smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in days. For every threat they received, there were countless messages of support. And that, he realized, was the real power of their movement. That night, as Malik lay in bed, he thought about how far they had come. The threats hadn't stopped, but neither had their fight. And with every challenge they faced, their resolve only grew stronger. He drifted off to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new battles, but also new opportunities to make a difference. Together, he and his mom would keep pushing forward, one step at a time, until the world they dreamed of became a reality. The days following the roundtable discussion were filled with a mix of hope and vigilance. Malik and his mom kept up their public appearances, speaking at schools, community centers, and even small businesses that invited them to share their story. The message was clear: hate would not win, and their community was united in the fight for equality. But beneath the surface, the tension remained. Malik had grown used to the constant presence of security guards and the occasional chilling message in his inbox. It wasn't ideal, but he had learned to focus on the support rather than the hate. One evening, as they sat in the living room reviewing their schedule for the week, Mayor Carter's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's from the chief of police," she said, answering the call. "Chief, what's going on?" Malik watched as her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm. "When?" she asked sharply. "Do we have any leads?" She ended the call and turned to Malik, her face serious. "There's been an attack." Malik's heart sank. "Where?" "The office of one of the lawmakers who supported the anti-hate legislation," she said. "They found a brick thrown through the window with a note attached. It's from the same group that's been targeting us." Malik felt a surge of anger. "Are they okay?" "Thankfully, no one was hurt," she said. "But it's a clear message. They're trying to intimidate anyone who stands with us." Malik clenched his fists. "We can't let them get away with this." "We won't," his mom said firmly. "The police are already investigating, and we'll make sure this only strengthens our case for the new law." The attack on the lawmaker's office brought a renewed sense of urgency to their mission. Malik and his mom doubled down on their efforts, attending more public events and working closely with local leaders to ensure the community stayed informed and engaged. One of the most significant events was an upcoming rally at the state capitol, where the proposed legislation would be formally introduced. The rally was expected to draw thousands of supporters, as well as a heavy police presence to ensure safety. As the day of the rally approached, Malik found himself both excited and anxious. This was a pivotal moment, not just for their city, but for the entire state. If the legislation passed, it would set a precedent for other communities to follow. On the morning of the rally, Malik stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie his mom had helped him pick out. He took a deep breath, reminding himself why they were doing this. When he joined his mom in the living room, she gave him a proud smile. "You ready?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do this." The rally was even larger than Malik had anticipated. The Capitol steps were packed with people holding signs and banners, their voices united in chants of hope and defiance. The atmosphere was electric, a powerful reminder of the strength that came from standing together. Malik and his mom were escorted to the stage, where a lineup of speakers awaited their turn. Lawmakers, activists, and community leaders all took the microphone, sharing their stories and calling for action. When it was Malik's turn, he stepped up to the podium, the crowd's cheers washing over him. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, then began. "I'm here today because of a simple truth. No one should have to live in fear because of who they are," he said. "But fear is exactly what hate groups want to spread. They want us to feel small, to stay silent. And every time we refuse to back down, we show them that their tactics won't work." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy fueling Malik's confidence. "This legislation isn't just about punishing hate," he continued. "It's about protecting our communities and sending a message that we won't tolerate discrimination in any form. Together we can create a future where everyone feels safe and valued." As he finished, the crowd rose to their feet, their cheers echoing across the Capitol grounds. Malik stepped back, his heart pounding with pride and determination. Mayor Carter took the microphone next, delivering a powerful speech that reinforced the importance of the proposed legislation. By the time the rally concluded, the momentum was undeniable. Later that evening, as they returned home, Malik and his mom received word that the legislation had been officially scheduled for a vote. It was a significant step forward, but the journey was far from over. In the quiet of their living room, Malik sat with his mom, reflecting on everything they had accomplished so far. "Do you think we'll win?" he asked. "I believe we will," she said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "Because we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who's ever been silenced, for everyone who dreams of a better world." Malik nodded, her words filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would face it together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. In the weeks leading up to the vote, the tension in the air was palpable. The city buzzed with anticipation, and Malik and his mom found themselves in a whirlwind of activity, meeting with lawmakers, attending community forums, and coordinating with activists. Each day brought a new challenge, but it also brought more hope as support for the legislation continued to grow. However, the threats hadn't stopped. If anything, they had intensified. One evening, as Malik worked on a speech for an upcoming event, His phone buzzed with a notification. It was a video message sent anonymously. He hesitated before opening it, his heart racing. The video showed a dark room with a figure speaking directly into the camera, their voice distorted. "You made your stand," the figure said, their tone cold. "Now it's our turn. The vote won't happen. And if it does, you'll regret it." Malik's stomach turned. He immediately called his mom into the room and showed her the video. "This is serious," she said, her expression grim. "We'll report it right away." The security team and police were notified, and an investigation was launched. Despite the looming danger, Mayor Carter remained focused. "This is exactly what they want," she told Malik that night. "They want to scare us into stopping, but we won't." Malik nodded, her resolve bolstering his own. "We won't." The day of the vote finally arrived. The state capitol was surrounded by a heavy security presence, with officers stationed at every entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but charged with determination. Malik and his mom were seated in the gallery, alongside other activists and community leaders. Below them, lawmakers debated the bill. The speeches were impassioned, with supporters highlighting the urgent need for stronger protections against hate crimes. As the vote approached, Malik's hands clenched tightly in his lap. He could feel his mom's steady presence beside him, her calm energy grounding him. Finally, the roll call vote began. Malik held his breath as each name was called, the ayes and nays echoing through the chamber. It was close, closer than Malik had expected. With each vote, the tension in the room grew heavier, and then was over. The presiding officer announced the results. The bill had passed by a narrow margin. The gallery erupted into applause, and Malik felt a rush of relief and pride. He turned to his mom, who was smiling, her eyes bright with emotion. "We get it," she said, pulling him into a hug. Malik grinned, the weight of the past weeks momentarily lifting. This was a victory, not just for them, but for everyone who had fought alongside them. The passage of the legislation marked a turning point. The city held a celebration, and Malik and his mom were honored for their courage and leadership. The new law was a symbol of progress, a testament to the power of standing together against hate. But the fight wasn't over. Malik knew that true change would take time and continued effort. He and his mom remained committed, working tirelessly to ensure the new law was implemented effectively, and that the community stayed engaged. One evening, as they walked through their neighborhood, Malik reflected on how far they had come. "Do you think things will really get better now?" he asked. His mom smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "They already are," she said. "But change is like planting a tree. It takes time for the roots to grow deep, for the branches to spread. What we've done is just the beginning." Malik looked around at the familiar streets, feeling a sense of pride and hope. They had faced fear and adversity, but they had emerged stronger. Together they had shown that even in the face of hate, unity and courage could prevail. And for the first time in a long while, Malik felt a deep, unshakable certainty. They were building something lasting, something that would stand tall for generations to come. In the months following the passage of the anti-hate legislation, the city began to transform. The law was more than a piece of paper. It was a statement, a promise that hate would be met with accountability, and that every resident, regardless of their background, deserved to feel safe. Community programs flourished. Schools implemented new curricula focused on inclusion and empathy. Local businesses proudly displayed signs that red hate has no home here. Neighborhoods held workshops and events that brought people together in ways Malik had never seen before. The momentum was real, and it was growing. For Malik, life had changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. He had become a symbol of resilience, a role he didn't take lightly. His days were filled with speaking engagements, mentorship programs, and planning sessions for new initiatives. But through it all, he never lost sight of what mattered most, staying grounded in the community that had supported him. One afternoon, Malik found himself at the community center, the same one that had been vandalized months earlier. It was fully restored now, its murals more vibrant than ever. Children played on the basketball court, their laughter filling the air. Parents chatted on benches and volunteers organized supplies for an upcoming food drive. Malik stood near the court, watching the scene with a sense of quiet pride. His mom joined him, her usual calm presence by his side. "Looks different, doesn't it?" she said, her voice soft. "Yeah," Malik replied, his eyes scanning the colorful murals. "It feels hopeful." Mayor Carter smiled. "That's because it is. This place is a testament to everything we've worked for." They watched as a group of kids ran up, their faces lighting up when they recognized Malik. "Hey, Malik," one of them called. "Can you show us some moves?" Malik chuckled, grabbing a basketball from the rack. "All right, but only if you're ready to get schooled." The kids cheered, and for the next half hour, Malik taught them his best moves, their laughter and energy infectious. His mom watched from the sidelines, her heart full. Later, as the sun began to set, Malik and his mom walked home. The streets felt familiar and safe, the weight of fear that once loomed over them now replaced with a sense of belonging and purpose. As they reached their house, Malik paused at the doorstep. "Do you think we've done enough?" he asked, his tone thoughtful. Mayor Carter looked at him, her expression proud but reflective. "We've done a lot," she said, "but the work is never really done, and that's a good thing. It means we'll always have something worth fighting for." Malik nodded, her words settling into his heart. He understood now that change wasn't about a single victory or moment. It was about the journey, the constant effort to build a better world. They stepped inside, the warmth of their home wrapping around them. Malik felt a sense of peace, a quiet strength that came from knowing they had made a difference. And as he looked ahead, he knew their story wasn't just about them. It was about every person who had joined their fight, every voice that had risen in solidarity. Together, they had started something powerful, something unbreakable. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of countless others, and Malik was ready for whatever came next.